Welcome to Author Talk on CBSNews.com. We are joined today by Geoffrey Gray, author of Skyjack, a book about the fascinating case of D.B. Cooper, or Dan Cooper, the man who's hijacked a plane 40 years ago, a case that remains unsolved, the only unsolved hijacking in history, in U.S. history?
In the world.
In the world, there you go. Who also, by the way, you lucked into a bit of news recently, you may have seen, when it was announced that the FBI may have a major break in the D.B. Cooper case. Let's talk about that first. Did they have a break?
Well, I mean, this was like one of these experiences you just can't make up. Here it is, like a week before the book is published. I spent 4 years investigating this case and not coming to any conclusion as to who the hijacker is. It's not really what my book's about. And I'm trying to think, like, all right, who am I going to invite to the book party? You know, thinking about these things. And I read on the internet, Cooper case about to be solved. And literally what happened is that this cavalcade of accidents and events where one particular lead that the FBI thought had merit trickled, cascaded, avalanched into this media storm during the slowest news week of the year.
So it got overcovered.
Yeah, in a way it got overcovered, and but also what was unique about the event is that despite the problems with the new evidence proffered, the story really resonated with the country, and I think that's the phenomenon that was most interesting to me. Is that why is it that we were willing to engage with this kind of story at that time? And one of the things that I began to piece together, before when all this stuff happened, is that it really felt like the country now is in a very similar moment to where we were in 1971. Mark Twain had this great saying. He said, history never repeats itself, it only rhymes. And so you have all these same different things going on now as they did in 1971, which is where the legend was born. Bad economy, frustration, paranoia over technology, really an atmosphere where somebody who commits an act of individualism could be celebrated.
Whether it's crazy individualism or not, or illegal individualism or not.
Right.
That's interesting. Do you get the sense that people who were fascinated by the case this time around again in the past couple weeks were brand new to it and had never heard of it before, or they followed it back then?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of new D.B. Cooper fans out there, and people like I did had no idea about this case. This was, for the most part, a regional, provincial, Pacific Northwest thing. And now everybody knows about it and everyone's fascinated about it. And I think it was like this as we approach the 40th anniversary of the hijacking this fall, it's like a new introduction to it for sure.
The new lead, though, did turn out to be, essentially, that's not D.B. Cooper.
The new lead about a woman's uncle, Uncle Lynn Doyle Cooper, Uncle LD, was vanilla ice cream in the D.B. Cooper world. It was a lead like many others, based on a memory that was somewhat old, and was just, if you had the luxury of spending 3 years on the case and reading, the details of the more than 1,000 suspects and persons of interest, it would be a lead that would feel very familiar. But the way in which it was presented and the seriousness with which the FBI took it really sort of avalanched it or skyrocketed it.
Yeah, it was all over the place. Speaking of the FBI, you were, as far as we know, the first journalist to gain access to some of these files that dealt with the case. What surprised you most about those files?
Well, what surprised me most about the files, once I started wading into this treasure, really, was not only the details of the hijacking, which I was able to recreate really minute by minute in the book, but all the other Uncle L.D. Coopers in there. The file itself is mostly filled with our own paranoia. Letters written from neighbors, ex-lovers, fathers, suspecting everybody of being the hijacker. And to me, reading these accounts of how you could suspect that your loved one could have pulled off this crazy job, to me was a phenomenon worth exploring.
And that's part of that's a large approach of the book, is you looked into why all these people did this. Obviously not all of them are right. None of them may be right about their uncle or relative, but there was this searching. People devote their lives to trying to figure out whether their relative was D.B. Cooper.
Right. Right. It's a true phenomenon where, in our country we have a tendency to celebrate criminals in a lot of ways. When you think of The Sopranos, or when you think of our obsession with wise guys and different things, but Cooper himself was a transcendentalist in a lot of ways. He was able to make the good guys root for the bad guys. Even the law enforcement people that were looking for him in the woods wanted him to escape, and people want to share in that coup. People want to share in that story, and are looking for him right now.
He was also this mythical macho figure, smoking a cigarette on a plane, or at the time when cigarettes were being smoked on planes, drinking a scotch.
Right. I mean, one of the things I found was so interesting about this story is that the myth of Cooper, of D.B. Cooper, and the true story of Dan Cooper are two totally different tales, and they probably the opposite of each other. One of the things about hijackers I found, reading psychologist reports of them, was that hijackers themselves were actually very generally effeminate. A lot of them were latent homosexuals, and believe it or not. And so I believe that the hijacker himself was nothing like the myth. We had this idea of this sort of debonair guy in a suit and tie smoking butts, but his tie was a clip-on from JCPenney's. His suit, I don't even think matched his pants. It was what I believe to be maroon-colored or russet even, and he was a schlub.
He was a schlub, but he was at least slightly sophisticated. I mean, he knew a little bit about what he was doing, right? And he was smooth.
Right. He was very talented in his ability to work under extreme pressure. One of the things that I found in the files is just these details of him dealing with these parachutes on this flight, flying over the great forests of the Pacific Northwest with the stairs down in a rainstorm, tying this money bag to himself, and he had a pocket knife. He thought everything out for the most part. So while schlubby, he did possess a certain body of knowledge, probably obtained in the military.
He got away with how much money?
$200,000 in $20 bills.
$200,000 all in $20 bills. There's no dispute about the fact at this point that he did jump from the plane in a parachute. It's just a question of what happened then.
It's a question of where and what happened, and nobody knows. And every time you try to figure out where and what happened, yet another mystery pops up.
The biggest clue was some of the money, the kind of burned up or at least messed up money that was found several years later.
In general, there are two major clues to this thing. One was $5,800 found buried in some sand on a riverbed or riverbank between Washington and Oregon. And the mystery of that find is that it was in a completely different location from where the plane flew. So how did the money get there? The other clue discovered recently is the name the hijacker used, Dan Cooper. For years the FBI thought Dan Cooper was like this Main Street name, like this Mike Smith. They couldn't figure out what it meant. But now we know, through some sleuthing, that Dan Cooper actually was significant. The name was very important. And who Dan Cooper was...
Why? Why is the name so important?
Well, Dan Cooper was a French comic book character who flew airplanes really fast and jumped out of them in parachutes. And when you read this French comic, which has never been translated into English, you see this macho, rugged guy, this sort of Royal Canadian Air Force G.I. Joe. And it really makes sense that the hijacker would use this alias. Furthermore, a lot of evidence that I discovered in the files points to the possibility that the hijacker could have Canadian roots or be Canadian.
Did he survive the jump?
Evidence looks that way. The evidence looks that way. It's not conclusive, but I worked a lot with forensic scientists who analyzed the money under like major microscopes, and from what they were able to uncover, they believed that the hijacker did survive the jump.
But then we don't know where he went after that. Nobody knows. Does the case ever get solved, in your opinion?
The only way that this case could be solved is through the extraordinary. I don't know what that extraordinary is or could be. Could it be more money found? Could it be someone else coming forward with something? It needs to be something physical that we hadn't explored before, because the problem in the case is that the physical evidence that the FBI has in its possession is not good enough to match against. So what I mean by that is that they have lots of fingerprints found in an in-flight magazine, but all of them are partial, and none of them may be the hijackers. They have partial DNA strains found on his tie, but none of them are good enough to ascertain the hijacker's real genetic identity. And the key piece of evidence that, in my opinion, could be used to actually close the case for good, could actually be used to extract a full genetic code, are the 8 Raleigh filter-tip cigarette butts the hijacker smoked and put it in the ashtray of row 18 on the flight. And the FBI has had these cigarette butts, and they analyzed them in 1971, according to the files. But the cigarette butts are now missing, and nobody knows where they are.
Look at this mystery now.
And so were they stolen from the evidence room by somebody on the inside, or were they completely lost? Who knows? But we need these cigarette butts, or else this case could go cold for a very long time.
Yeah, something tells me the fascination isn't going to go away. All right, Geoffrey Gray, author of Skyjack. It's a fascinating read if you get a chance. You've been watching Author Talk on CBSNews.com.